Different people call themselves Christians. Are you like someone who is fired up to share what he believes? Or like someone who just keeps it to himself? Does it even matter? Hi, Dovann here. Welcome to Week at a Glance, where we dive into a thoughtful summary of this week's Bible study guide. If you don't have a copy of the study guide, then check out the link below. In today's episode, we will talk about the power of sharing your personal story to win others to Jesus. I remember growing up at a Christian campus where professionals and lay people come to attend seminars and advanced vocational trainings. On Sabbath afternoons, they would be given the opportunity to share their testimonies. It was very interesting to hear their heartwarming stories. Storytelling is such a powerful tool to convey an idea and move people to action. Some people are very good at crafting a story and telling it in a very exciting and very pleasing way. But in our Christian life, it doesn't depend on how good you could tell a story. But what matters most is the story you tell, not just any story, but your personal story. Stories that can touch the lives of others and lead them to Jesus. Here are the important points to remember for today's episode. Point number one, telling your story. But wait, you may say, Keo, I don't have a dramatic story like Paul's Damascus Road story. My story is not interesting at all. Now, to understand this, we need to acknowledge that there are two basic types of conversion stories. First, you have the dramatic conversion story. Someone grew up in a Christian home and left the faith, or someone grew up in a bad environment and then they had this dramatic cinematic story. The second is the silent conversion story. Here we find someone who has been brought up in a Christian home and has accepted God through a long process of time. Some of them can't even pinpoint an event in their life that they call their conversion story. So you're probably asking by now, what's your point? Not one of us is born a Christian. We all go through conversion. And because of this, all of us, you and I, we have a story to tell. Your story is not my story. My story is not your story. Every single story is unique. It doesn't matter what type of conversion you had or is still having, you have a story to tell. A story of your personal encounter with God, a story that God can use to impact the lives of others. But there is one prerequisite for this to be eligible. It has to be genuine. It has to be an authentic experience that you have with God and not something made up. We find different authentic stories in the Bible, both dramatic and silent conversions. We find the dramatic story of a demon-possessed man in the Bible who was freed and healed by Jesus. We also find the silent conversion stories of the disciples and the followers of Jesus. Their witnessing was very powerful because of one fundamental element: a changed life. And this leads us to our next point, experiencing the story. When you tell your story, you are in essence sharing your faith. And sharing our faith is always a dynamic experience. Let me try to unpack this. It should not be something that is trapped in the past, you checked off from your bucket list, done, done, done. It is telling the story of what Jesus has done for you in the past, what he's doing for you today, and what he will accomplish for you in the future. Sharing your story should awaken the interest of others to experience such a story with God. Take, for instance, the Apostle Paul. He was someone who displayed such a dynamic experience. Read about his masterful face-to-face witnessing in Acts 26 before King Agrippa. It was so extraordinary that the king replied, "You almost persuaded me to be a Christian." Now, we move on to our final point, living your story. In Acts 4, the religious rulers had Peter and John arrested for witnessing and healing and prohibited them from sharing the story of Jesus. There will always be people who will refuse to change their attitude towards God. But this should not hinder us from sharing Jesus to others. Peter and John answered back to the religious rulers and said, "Do you think God wants us to obey you or to obey him? We cannot keep quiet about the things we have seen and heard." The lives of these disciples were so transformed that nothing was going to stop them from sharing and living their stories. When what you do harmonizes with what you say, then you have an effective story. An effective story to share that is not only heard, but also seen. Now let's go back to the story when I was a young boy, listening to the different testimonies, because these stories made an impact in my life. Growing up, I didn't know that one day I will be sharing my personal story to touch the lives of others. God desires to use your personal story with Him to touch the lives of others. Sometimes you may not even be aware of it, how your personal stories have left a deep impression in the lives of other people. In summary, here are the different points that we talked about in this episode: telling your story, experiencing the story, living your story. And if you find this episode helpful, then please share it with a friend. Spread the word and change lives one message at a time. And if you would like to know more about why you should be a witness for God, then click on this video. Share your story to others. Be a witness for God. This is again Dovann for Week at a Glance. See you again next week.